Good afternoon, and welcome to this inaugural lecture for the L'Oreal Professor of Marketing, Professor Andrew Stevens. So, Professor Stevens has been with us about a year and a half. Let me tell you a bit about the process by which he came to the university. Marketing has existed forever, but it's been changing dramatically over the last 10 years or so. 10 years ago, we didn't think about social media or Snapchat or Instagram or any of the other things that are so everyday. And so when we were searching for the next L'Oreal professor, it was important that we look forward to the future of marketing and not backward to the past of marketing. And it's in that spirit that we undertook the search for the L'Oreal professor. Having done that, it was relatively easy to find Andrew Stevens. Not easy to convince him to come, but easy to find him at least. Professor Stevens is a remarkable young scholar who has, and you're going to hear more about his work, works in the intersection between social media, digital marketing, marketing in more general terms, and how, in fact, society interacts with social media. His work is widely published, and you're going to hear some of that today. He's also well recognized. The American Marketing Association has identified him as one of the top 25 most prolific scholars. He's been awarded 40 under 40 by Poets and Quants for the 40 best business school professors under the age of 40. Before coming here, he taught at INSEAD, at Columbia, and at the University of Pittsburgh. We were thrilled to get him to come join our community, and I think you'll be equally thrilled to hear what he has to share with us today. With that, I'd like to introduce Professor Stevens. Oh, excuse me. I forgot one thing. I'd like to special welcome to Professor Stevens' family who are here, and also to a representative from L'Oreal.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Vice-Chancellor, Dean Tofano, the Provost of Worcester College, colleagues, family and friends, students, and members of our extended Oxford family who are here this evening. Welcome to this inaugural lecture. Thank you very much for taking time out of what I'm sure has been a busy day to come and hear some guy talk about marketing. And I'm definitely going to talk about marketing, and I'm going to lay out a vision, my vision really, for the future of what I really feel is an increasingly important field or discipline within business, both on the academic side and the practice side. We've seen a lot of change and innovation in marketing in recent years, largely due to technology. So a running theme throughout this lecture is certainly going to be technology, but that's not the whole story. For those of you who aren't really familiar with marketing, I thought it's probably a good idea to preface this by mentioning it's not just advertising. There's more to it than that, and our students, if you don't realize that, you're going to know this next term. It will be on the exam. But really, marketing is one of those melting pots. And if you think about what marketing is and where ideas come from to bear on market problems, traditionally and historically, marketing has been about economics, it's been about psychology and sociology. I think in today's day and age, we would add to that data science, technology, computer science, and engineering as just some additional fields that I think inform what marketing is really about. Being multidisciplinary makes it really, really exciting, but it also means there's lots of challenges in bringing all of these ideas into this melting pot to make sense of it for business and real value for business and stakeholders of business and what we do. So I'm going to talk about that. Before I do that, though, I just want to acknowledge a few people who are here this evening who are in one way or another responsible for getting me to this point tonight. The first, and probably the ultimately most responsible person, is my mother. So I'm really fortunate that my mum is here tonight. I don't want to embarrass her. She's come here all the way from our home in Brisbane, Australia, and it's probably safe to say that not many inaugural lectures at Oxford have had a situation where the professor presenting us has had a parent who's been able to be here. So I'm pretty proud about that, and I'm really proud that my mother is here. Also, it's a big week for us. On Wednesday, she has quite a significant birthday. So we're having a lot of fun this week, kicking it off with tonight. The second person I want to acknowledge is my wife, Fiona, who is an incredible person on many counts and relevant to what I do professionally. She's actually what I call a real marketer. meaning that she does that for a living. And so she's a really good sounding board for my crazy, wacky academic ideas. But she really grounds them in relevance and practice. And we've been very, very, very fortunate to go on a journey together, and we're still on a journey together in our professional and personal lives. That's taken us in the last decade or so to living on 4 different continents and experiencing just a lot of amazing things. So I'm deeply, deeply proud and fortunate to have Fiona here to experience this with me this evening. And lastly, an event such as tonight has a lot of moving parts that go on in the background. I just want to acknowledge our amazing professional teams within the school in corporate marketing, in events, in AV, and particularly faculty services and Michelle and Arta, who are probably running around still with headpieces outside, who have really done an amazing job putting this together. And I'm not just the only person that's here for this event tonight. They've really done an amazing job, and I think we need to give them the credit that is due. So with that, let's talk a little bit about marketing. Actually, first, I'll just indulge and talk a little bit about me. So Peter gave a little bit of a background of myself, but I thought it's prudent to give you a little bit more personal context, not a long bio, but just sort of the short version, to give you some context from where I'm coming from with some of the ideas I'll talk about in this lecture. So the short version is I grew up in Brisbane, Australia. I went to the University of Queensland, which is in Brisbane, and did undergraduate degrees in business, but also engineering. And the engineering bit is important, which will come up a little bit later. After that, I moved to the United States, to New York, where I did master's and a PhD at Columbia. After that, I was at INSEAD, which is a business school in France and Singapore, then the University of Pittsburgh, and now here at Oxford for the last sort of year and a half. So moved around a lot. We like to joke about we ship cheap furniture back and forth across the Atlantic, but hopefully we're not shipping things for a long time now because we really love it here. But I think as a scholar, Peter described me as a digital marketing person, someone who studies social media, and that's very, very true. But I think really what I'm about is trying to understand new technologies in market environments, how firms and people, particularly consumers, use and integrate and sort of grapple with new technologies and innovations in our marketplaces. I think this is a really hot area of study at the moment. It's a constant moving target, if you will, because there's always new technologies. And there's always something new to potentially use. And I think that's exciting, but it also poses a number of challenges. I think marketing's really been shaken up, and it continues to be shaken up. So with that, I sort of thought I'd touch on a few, what I thought were sort of maybe 3 dominant technologies that have influenced what I've been working on for the last decade or so, and I think are still really important. And then I'll move in to think about what the future holds. So the first one is social media. So most of my work has really been in the space of social media. Whether we're talking about Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever else, or sort of online social interactions in online communities, user-generated content, reviews, and the like. I think we've seen incredible amounts of growth. Just to give you some numbers, and these actually, Facebook released these, this is just for Facebook as an example, released these last week. Facebook, as of the end of September, had 1.79 billion monthly active users, and then the average day in September saw about 1.18 billion active users on Facebook. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that, and that's just one platform. Whether you like it or not, social media is a really, really big deal, and it continues to be a big part of my research program, and I'll talk about some of those things in a moment. The second big technology, I think, is mobile. I think it's really, really hard for us now to think about an existence without being tethered to a nice little pocket-sized computer. But really what that means, I think, from a marketing standpoint and a consumer behavior standpoint, is that consumers are what I like to call always on and constantly connected. So that has implications for how we market to people, has implications for the sorts of data we collect, or we can potentially collect and access about people as they go about their daily lives as just regular people as well as consumers. And it really influences the way we think about marketing because it's now much more real time, sort of right place, right time, or at least we have those capabilities. And then if you combine mobile with social media, and really the majority of social media use is now on mobile devices, you've got a very powerful combination that can be used for good and can be used for bad as well. And there are some pitfalls that we would need to consider there. But it's really changing how marketplaces function, and to some extent how democracies and societies function as well at sort of a bigger picture level. But I think in a business context, I think there's a lot to be said for mobile as sort of a revolution in how we access information, but also we create information, whether that's by posting a tweet on Twitter, or live streaming video from Facebook, or whatever else it might be. We're content creators as much as we are content consumers, and we can do that in real time and at the right place. So that's an interesting sort of dominant trend that I've also seen influence a lot of my research into how firms and consumers use new technologies and markets. The third one is data, or maybe sometimes big data, although I don't think it's always the size that matters. Marketing, like a lot of fields, has undergone sort of this deluge of data, this explosion of data. The question is, though, what on earth do we do with it? So we can collect it, we can store it, we can analyze it, and certainly analytics capabilities have been rapidly increasing year on year, and that's really, really exciting. So we have really fancy tools and lots of things, lots of data that we can use these tools on. But I think that the fundamental question at the heart of marketing still is, well, what are the questions we need to ask about data? And we need to ensure that marketers continue to ask the right questions, the appropriate questions, the questions that matter and can drive value creation, which is really what marketing should always be about, so that we use these increasingly sophisticated analytics capabilities in combination with the large amounts of data we now have at our fingertips, really as marketers, so that we can use this for appropriate benefit. So a lot of my research has touched on these themes, and I'll give you some more examples in a moment. But I also think there's a lot of new interesting things happening that I want to touch on, just to give you a sort of a taste of how things keep on evolving as new technologies and markets. First one is artificial intelligence. I think this is constantly on the rise and something that's on the horizon. I think the jury's out rather in terms of how this overtly impacts consumers and markets, beyond being frustrated with how AI maybe gets it wrong. So probably the best example of AI at the moment that you would face in your daily lives is if you use Siri or some other, Amazon Echo or something like that, and it doesn't understand you. Maybe this is just a problem peculiar to me, but I can speak to these things and they never know what I'm talking about, and my wife gets angry at me. But this is AI. And so this is definitely not just on the horizon, and I think we need to understand how this works in a marketing setting, because it's going to influence how we make decisions. And there's already talk about how algorithms are ruling the world and constraining our choices, our options, the information that we have accessible to us, and this is a real issue that we're going to have to grapple with. The second sort of thing on the horizon that I think we should think about is robots, and the rise of robots. Now, you probably could think about this in two different ways. Maybe there's more ways, but the way I think about it is there's the virtual bots, sort of chat bots, things like that you might face in messaging apps or maybe online customer service, things like that. But then there's the physical robots out there as well that may be taking away our jobs at some point. Actually, and here's an example. This is my son Harry meeting the hotel concierge of the future in Tokyo earlier this year, affectionately called Robo. But the question I think from a marketing standpoint is, how much of a human touch do we still need? And when do we need the human touch? When is that going to be relevant to consumers and customers? When is it going to be valuable to do that? Versus when should we essentially outsource to automation and to either software or hardware or combinations of that from a sort of a robot standpoint? And this is a topic really at the frontier of how we think about consumer behavior and marketing at the moment. The third one, in terms of, I guess, an up-and-coming technology I think we need to think about is virtual reality. You could probably lump augmented reality into this as well. So VR and AR seems to be all the rage, seems to be everything you read about at the moment from a marketing technology standpoint. And that's great, but I'm not sure we're past the gimmick stage yet. Not to say that there aren't some really, really interesting and I think effective applications of this in business, but we need to think about ways to use these beyond just sort of the bells and whistles of the cool technology. And I think that's a recurring theme as we approach all these new technologies and innovations, which are fantastic and exciting from a science standpoint. I think if we bring them into the marketplace, we need to really think hard and carefully about, well, how do we use these things in a value-creating way so that we're not just sort of wasting money or annoying people or irritating people in doing so. Experimentation is great, don't get me wrong, but we need to look at these things carefully. So I could keep going on with a list of technologies, and there's just always new things. And to me, as someone with an engineering background, I get really excited about this stuff. You know, I study the interface of marketing and technology because I'm into technology. And these emergent technologies, I think, are really exciting, but we need to be careful about the implementation. Because there's a lot in marketers' toolkits now from a technology standpoint, or sort of the technology stack, if you will. And marketing technology actually as an industry or a sub-industry year on year is growing exponentially. So there's a lot happening in this space. But I think, you know, when you see a lot happening and a lot happening rapidly, it gives you cause to stop and think about, you know, is this right? Is this appropriate? And so, you know, when I think about this, unfortunately, I think that marketers, academics and practitioners alike, have gotten quite technology obsessed. And maybe we're getting obsessed in one thing at the expense of another. And so it begs the question, has marketing lost its way in this context, in this world? You know, in our highly digitized and technology-driven world, which is only going to become increasingly digitized and technology-driven, we need to take stock of where we're at and think about what makes sense. And so I really do wonder if marketing has lost its way, and if it has, then how do we get back on track? Because fundamentally, marketing is about delivering growth and value to the firm as well as to customers and to other stakeholders. It's about demand generation and growing that demand, but doing it in a valuable way. So if that's the point, we need to look at technology through that lens, and I think we might have forgotten a little bit about that. Technology absolutely has to be a part of it. There's absolutely no way that technology can't be a big part of what marketing is into the future, but we can't let the cart get before the horse in some sense, and I think that's a possibility. Particularly when we see companies investing, sometimes billions of, pick your currency, dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, in really marketing, things that are labeled marketing initiatives, but are really IT infrastructure projects, with a marketing label attached to them, without any necessarily clear marketing purpose behind them. So we have to stop and think. I think we've gotten to the point where a lot of the time we're technology first and customers second, and my argument is that we need to move away from that. I don't think it's a great way to create value for anyone, quite frankly. And we'll talk about who those sort of where the sources of value lie in a moment. So if we think about this, if I was to put a label to attach sort of a term to this, I'd say that marketing has succumbed to the so-called shiny new toy syndrome. It's a serious condition now faced or afflicting millions of marketers, executives, and boards around the world. We're getting caught up in this, and sadly, cases appear to be on the rise. So jokes aside, I think technology for the sake of technology is not good business practice, and certainly not good marketing practice. And there are serious consequences to this. So yes, it can be wasteful, but I think there are serious consequences from a sort of consumer welfare standpoint. Because a significant source of marketing value that marketers deliver to the firm comes from customers, comes from marketing assets such as brands and customers and the relationships you build with those customers. And if we're using technology in ways that don't necessarily enhance the value of those relationships, then we're falling prey to this shiny new toy syndrome. And that leads to subpar marketing tactics. But not just wastage, but I think there are consumer welfare issues as a result of that. So to give an example, we can see this with ad blocking. So here's a statistic that was reported in the New York Times a couple of months ago. Ad blocking software is on the rise. If this stat is right, 1 in 5 of you in this room would have some form of ad blocking software on your phone. And that's going up. I think it's an annual increase of about 90%, and this is globally. So why does that matter? Well, it's bad for advertisers who want to reach people, but it says something about what consumers think of advertising. And actually in some other reports and other surveys that were done looking into this, actually the top 2 reasons why people used ad blocking software were that they found ads to be annoying, intrusive, and disruptive. So basically marketing in some way, to some people in their mind is irritating. And I think that's not the point of marketing. That's not our role. That's not what good marketers try and do. But if that's what's happening, as evidenced, for example, by the use of software that blocks marketers, then we need to take a look at ourselves. And this is particular in the digital marketing space, so the marketing technology space. So yeah, marketing shouldn't irritate people. That's not our purpose. Now, this is not actually a new thing. So believe it or not, preparing for this lecture, I was looking back on the history of marketing. I was sort of curious, when did marketing first come about? So being Oxford, I consulted the Oxford English Dictionary. And they have a nice online tool that tells you where and when a word first appeared. So that's really great. So the word marketing apparently first appeared in English text in 1561. Now, turns out it was in Thomas Norton's English translation of Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, no less. So I thought, okay, that's really interesting. I'm at Oxford. We have an amazing library called the Bodleian. Surely they've got a copy of this. Maybe I can read it on the train on the way home. So off I go to the Bodleian and meet the lovely librarians who look at me strangely and insist that no human being is going to touch this thing. So, okay. But they were kind enough to send me some scanned pages. So I guess some human beings can touch it. And so if you look at it, and I was sort of curious how the word's being used. And so I certainly don't claim to be a sort of a scholar of old texts. There are many people in this university who are much more skilled at that than I am as a mere marketing professor. But I didn't have to go too far. So here's the page that the word appears on. There's marketing. I don't expect you to be able to see this. But I had to go one word before it. So the adjective used to describe marketing is filthy. So perhaps as far back as the 16th century, at least in documented English text, some people had a problem with marketing. So maybe we get a little bit of a bad rap as a result. But I think this is a pertinent point because it suggests that it's not really about the technology, it's about how the technology is being used, in our case, in the 21st century. And I think the rapid pace of digitization and digital transformation of marketing and consumer behavior means that it's causing us some headaches. And if people are turning away and basically saying we don't want to be marketed at, we really need to rethink what we're doing. So, how do we address this shiny new toy syndrome? What do we do about it? So, I think we can learn a lesson from another discipline that deals with new technology all the time. And I mentioned engineering as sort of where I started out as an undergraduate. And so, maybe for better or worse, I think like an engineer. But if you think about it, engineering is a field. Pick whichever discipline within engineering you like, and there are always new technological innovations, new technology tools, new ways of doing things that enter into the sort of prospective toolkit, if you will, for solving a problem. Building something, doing something better, whatever it might be. And so when I was sort of reflecting on this and reflecting on sort of academically where I came from, I realized there are approaches to technology and markets that I've been using in my research and my teaching for some time now, which actually maps right on to sort of an engineering approach to things. And I think that can actually help us in getting out of this technology-first problem, this obsession that sort of maybe distracted us from the goals of what we should be doing as marketers. So, if we adopt the engineering approach, and I'm going to sort of go through three things and illustrate these with some of my research from the years. I think the first one is problem solving. Now, you would think problem solving applies to anything, but I think engineers are trained to be problem solvers. And so for me, really, this has been largely about figuring out what works and what doesn't work when it comes to new technologies or new advertising channels or new media types that can be used in marketplaces. You want to figure out when something's, if something new is going to work, how it's going to work, why it works, why it doesn't work, when's it going to be effective, when's it going to be efficient, so that it can be used appropriately and not wastefully. So for example, in 2013, 2014, I published some work on mobile advertising in the Journal of Marketing Research and Harvard Business Review. By the way, from the titles there, you can probably guess which one's the academic journal. But it's based on the same piece of research, and this is actually in collaboration with an agency called Millward Brown, which is part of the Kantar group within WPP, who were kind enough to give a lot of data for this project, which was supported by them as well as Google. And the idea was pretty simple, and this is sort of in the earlier days of doing mobile display advertising. The idea was we'll look at a whole bunch of different ad campaigns which were run as experiments, meaning randomly half the people were shown the ad and the other half weren't, and then there were some measures taken, in this case purchase intent. And then you compare those groups, the test and control group or the exposed and control group, to see if the campaign worked on average. And so, pretty simple premise, but looking across, so we looked at 54 different campaigns from I think about 13 or so different industry sectors, so sort of a wide array. And we just wanted to see, what was going on at first. And so, this plot basically says that 70% of the campaigns we looked at had no effect. So now, optimistically, 30% did, which is great. But actually, to the researcher, this is great because you've got some things that are working and some things that are not. And now the problem-solving approach, from that engineering mindset, is, well, now let's figure out why. And in this case, it was to do with the types of products and how they were positioned, and sort of how those products were communicated to consumers. And so certain types of products work better than others in sort of mobile display advertising in this particular piece of research. But really, the idea more broadly is to sort of see an outcome or a market outcome as a problem that you want to solve, that you want to figure out. I think marketers can approach new technologies in that way. So if we think about using new technologies in markets, say for advertising purposes, typically we think of it as a solution to a problem, as sort of an answer to a question. I think the better way to think about it is the new technology is the problem, and you have to figure it out. It's the question that you need to answer before it can become an answer to some other sort of business question or marketing question. So I think that's the first one I wanted to talk about in terms of problem solving. Second one, which is a little bit broader, is what I like to call complex systems thinking. And basically, it's saying that the world is more complex than we would like it to be, but let's embrace that. And I think this is the way engineers think. They think of systems, they think of lots of moving parts and how those moving parts fit together, how they hopefully fit together in complementary and synergistic ways. And so that's what I think we need to do more in marketing, both on the academic side as well as the marketing practice side. But realizing that there are many, many parts to a system, whether it's a marketplace with lots of different people in that marketplace, so maybe you're thinking about social networks of consumers, or it's media channels that a marketer is allocating budget across, so TV, radio, print, digital display, mobile, social media, influencers, and so on. And you're trying to see how all these sort of moving parts, these parts of a complex system work together, as opposed to thinking about each of them in isolation. So I'll give you two examples. First one is a paper that I published in the Journal of Marketing Research in 2012, which looked at, and this is a less complicated title, I should say, looked at traditional media and social media and how they worked together as parts of a system, different media channels in a system to affect sales for an e-commerce website. And the idea here was simple. Instead of looking at, well, what's the impact of traditional media by itself? What's the impact of social media by itself? Let's look at these things together and see how they maybe work together or perhaps against each other. We found that they work together, but we also found when we model these things together, the impact of social media was much, much larger than traditional media in driving sales. And the social media actually helped influence the traditional media, which then in turn also influenced the sales. So there's sort of direct and indirect paths of influence or causality in this system. And so you need to look at this as a system to really get that insight. And it's an important insight because it influences how marketers might decide to allocate resources between these sort of two broad media types. Another example I want to use here is a paper that's coming out in another journal called Marketing Science, I think actually in January. So this is in press at the moment. And we think another way to think about complex systems is what I'd call spillover effects. So in some sense, unintended consequences of an action. So we looked at this in the context of what we call here seeded word-of-mouth campaigns, but to the marketers in the room, it's influencer marketing, basically. So the idea is a marketer will send a product sample out to a carefully selected consumer, a so-called influencer, and hope that they'll generate some content around that, so some word of mouth. Maybe they'll post on social media, hopefully favorably, and that's going to drive more people to be talking about that hopefully favorably in due course. Sort of everyone else is connected to them. So that's fine. That's pretty well established. In fact, that goes back about 60 to 70 years and has been looked at in lots of fields, not just marketing, sociology and physics even. So this idea of social contagion or diffusion of information is not new, but what we're looking at here is what are the other consequences of that for other things in that market environment. So again, as sort of a complex system. And so what we looked at here was spillover effects for the brand and for competitors' brands. So let me illustrate this, and I'm going to use L'Oreal as an example. And so this is, by the way, based on data from 390 beauty and cosmetics influencer campaigns for about 100 or so brands. So imagine you're L'Oreal and you're sending to influencers a lipstick, a new lipstick that you've launched and you want them to talk about. So let's call that the focal product, and we'll send that out to our influencers. They'll talk about it. Great. They'll post about it online, for example. And then that should generate an uptick in what everyone else is talking about. But part of this system is not just that L'Oreal Paris lipstick. It's also lipstick as a product category for which there are competitors. And then it's also L'Oreal or L'Oreal Paris as a brand for which there are other products in other categories. And so what we're looking at here is what are the consequences for the brand in terms of other products in different categories but from that same brand, and also consequences for competitors in terms of the amount of sort of online buzz that gets generated as a result of these campaigns. So spillover effects, which you need to sort of see from a complex systems perspective. So you could have this brand spillover, so maybe these people are more inclined then to talk about, say, L'Oreal Paris eyeliner, but maybe they're also going to talk about Chanel lipstick, right? Because now they're prompted about the category, and maybe they start to compare things or whatever else. So there's a lot of inherent complexity in just something as simple as thinking about how people talk about products, where the firm is initiating that conversation through an influencer campaign. So what we found, consistent with all of the prior literature in marketing and elsewhere, that sending the product out gets people talking about that product. We expected to see that. If we didn't see that, then there probably would have been something odd with our data or the way that we modeled it. But what we were interested in is these brand and competitor spillovers. And so what we actually found was a reduction in talking about other products from the same brand. So what we call a negative brand spillover, which if you're a marketing manager for that brand, it's not great, really. You would hope that it would be a green arrow pointing up, meaning a positive effect, because it's sort of an added bonus, sort of a halo effect of your campaign, but instead it was the other way around. And likewise also, although good news from a competitor standpoint. So once you start to think about these spillovers or this complex system environment, then you start to see these other consequences of marketing actions that you wouldn't otherwise be capturing. And the important thing here is to understand the direction of these effects, because what this suggests is you could actually use influencer campaigns not only to boost people talking about that product in the campaign, but also suppress competitor activity or conversation around the competitor's products at the same time. Sure, you're not going to get that nice little brand halo effect, but it could have a negative effect on your competitors. So, that's just an example of what happens when you expand that picture a little bit and see this as a complex system with multiple moving parts that work together and impact each other. And so if you model it that way, you think about it that way, then you often can get deeper and also broader insights as a result. So really everything's connected is the way to think about it. And so I think we need to think more often along those lines, both in terms of the research that we do, but also in terms of what happens in marketing practice. The third thing from this engineering approach that I want to talk about, which is even broader, is about understanding impacts and ideally making them positive or ensuring that they're positive, and if there is anything negative, that we engineer or design around that. So this is a little bit broader because if you think about what engineers do, they're trying to design things, they're trying to build things that hopefully impact people in a positive way. You build a bridge across a river, it cuts people's commute times in half, that sort of thing. So measurable differences in people's lives. But before you do that, you try and understand all the different impacts, good and bad and everything in between of what you're doing so that you can optimize. And I think we try and do that as marketers, but maybe not all the time. And I think we have broader impacts that we need to think about as well. Because really, at the end of the day, if we're generating value and growth, we also want to make people's lives better. I think we have a responsibility to do that if we're producing products and services and putting those into the marketplace. So here for me, as someone who spends a lot of time doing research on social media, what this led me to think of is actually social media as a product, if you will. So if you think about using Facebook, for instance, or Instagram, pick whatever it is you like to use, that's a service. It's a communications tool. It's a social interaction platform. It's a way that you can get exposed to advertising and other messages from brands and companies. But you're using something. It's a product. But it's quite a different product because it's used so pervasively by a lot of people around the world and all the time with our mobile devices. So this led to a sort of a stream of research that I've been working on for a number of years now into understanding the impacts of social media use, treating social media as a product or a service. And there's a project that we've just gotten underway at the moment, funded by the university's John Fell Fund, which is sort of a longitudinal study to look at this and look at how social media use impacts people's well-being and happiness, but breaking well-being down into different dimensions, so economic as well as physiological and psychological. Because I think that's within the realm of marketing as well, because people are using this as a product or a service, so we need to understand the broader impacts on people's lives. And that's actually this project, this study is prompted by some work I published a few years ago in the Journal of Consumer Research, which focused on Facebook specifically, and what happens to people in the context of self-esteem and self-control. So there'd been some work in social psychology a little bit before this paper that had shown some positive effects on self-esteem of using platforms like Facebook. So you sort of feel better about yourself after getting exposed to all the wonderful things your friends are doing in social media, because we're of course presenting ourselves in the best possible light. Now there's also conflicting work that would suggest that it's a negative effect because you feel like your life is miserable relative to everyone else. So we kind of thought that's interesting, and there'd been some work also in decision making and decision science around sort of the link between elevated self-esteem and people's self-control. Sort of basically, we call it the licensing effect, but it's sort of letting your guard down. You feel good, you feel happy, you feel like life is great, then you sort of maybe don't act as carefully in certain decisions that you make. So self-control suffers as a result of that. So we thought, well, let's put this together. So we ran experiments, randomized trials in this. We had people either use Facebook for 5 minutes or read the news for 5 minutes. And then we would have them do a lot of different things, but sort of a typical study was to then make some choice which would be indicative of their sort of momentary level of self-control. So the best one to use, I think, is get them to pick a snack. Do you want to pick the healthy snack or do you pick the chocolate chip cookie? And so what we found was after using Facebook for just 5 minutes, compared to our control groups who didn't, people were much, much more likely to choose the unhealthy snack, the chocolate chip cookie, let's say. More in the vicinity of about 80% of people in those conditions versus about 30% in the control groups. And we found this was because of elevated levels of self-esteem, particularly for those people who reported being connected to what we call stronger ties in Facebook. So they were getting exposed to content in their news feeds from people they kind of cared about because they were close friends, family members, and the like. So that's kind of troubling. So that led to this new study that we're doing. But there's also some other research which is underway also at the moment where we're looking at this in the context of people's online shopping behaviors. And so we have data for a panel of internet users, thousands of people that were tracked, with their permission, of course, for a year, where we know everything that they did online, all the different websites they went to, how much social media time they spent on the various social sites, and then we know what they bought in terms of online shopping. And you see this effect play out. So you see more time spent using social media having an impact on elevated levels of impulse buying, people shopping more sort of across the internet, going to more shopping sites, and buying more things that would typically be in product categories that are bought impulsively. Again, sort of an example of a failure of self-control. So I think the bottom line here is that we need to think about the impacts of these new tools, these new technologies, and I think it's part of the responsibility of consumer research, so that's within the realm of marketing, to think about this and to study this so that we can understand what's going on. Because if you think about just this effect on self-control, for instance, that has implications for advertising. It has policy implications too, because it suggests that if we want to be ethical in our advertising, we certainly shouldn't be catching people while they're weak in some sense, because their self-control has been even momentarily hindered by what they're doing in social media. So there are, again, sort of complex interplays between these different sorts of media that people are exposed to, and they can have important consequences, I think, for individual welfare and well-being. So that's another line of work that I think we're doing. So the question then becomes, what's next? So what's the solution here? So I sort of laid out these three components of sort of a more engineering type approach to how marketing considers and appropriates new technologies. And I think we need to use technology smartly to help us solve problems that need solving. So it's about doing something that's meaningful to customers and helping solve things that they need to have solved, not just sort of hammering them with stuff, quite frankly. We need to stop this technology-first approach because I think it leads us down that path and sort of somewhat of a slippery slope. So I think what this adds up to is an approach to marketing that I'm going to call marketing with purpose. And there's multiple aspects to this framework, which I'm introducing, but really what this is a call to do is to return to what marketing is meant to be about, which is about delivering value and growth to different stakeholders that have a stake in this game. And so marketing with purpose is really about getting back to our responsibility to do that. Now, there are three constituencies. So the first one is business value. Often when we talk about purpose in a business school these days, we're not really thinking about the bottom line. We're thinking about lots of other things, and that's important. I'll get to that. But if you can't keep the lights on, then what's the point? So I think business value is critical here, and purposeful marketing has to have good business sense and deliver value to the firm. But that's the first part. Second element is what I call people value. So it's important that I'm not saying customer value here, because there are sort of two sets of people, if you will, that we need to think about. One is customers. So delivering superior value to customers is critical. It has to be what marketing in large part stands for. That is a big part of sort of the value that marketing can deliver to a firm is through these relationships and that marketers can build with customers. And so I think that's critical. We need to help customers achieve their goals. We need to help them solve their problems. We need to get out of the way when they don't want us in the way, and not irritate them, and not annoy them and distract them and disrupt them. I really think shutting up and staying out of their lives when we have no place to be there is a serious and important thing to do. But there's another major group, and the reason why I use people that we need to think about, which I think gets not talked about enough in marketing, and that's the people within the firm, the employees, or really more broadly people who are involved in what we call the value chain, whether it's up the value chain, so suppliers, manufacturers, people who are working to produce the products, and then everything down that chain to sort of the frontline employees, say in the store or the retail environment. Because of the rapid pace of technological change and sort of the digital transformation of this field, people inside the firm are just racing to catch up. And I think the good marketing-driven companies are helping them catch up. But we need to think about marketing with purpose as delivering value to these people's lives, because they're part of this value exchange as well. I think that doesn't get thought about often enough in marketing. Often, I've had these conversations many times where you're talking to marketing executives and all they're talking about is what really sounds like HR problems. But that's indicative of what I mean by marketing with purpose from a people value standpoint. I think we need to think about customers, but we need to think broadly beyond just customers when we think about people that are involved in this value creation aspect of marketing. And then the third part is societal value. And so there's a few aspects to this, and some are maybe the more obvious ones. If we think about things like corporate social responsibility, being sustainable, eco-friendly, and so on, and that's all really, really important. But that's actually not really the crux of what I'm focusing on with this aspect of this framework. What I really mean is that I think there's a way to do marketing, there's a way to create business models that are marketing-driven business models that create value for society, people, and business together. I think we can do this in a way that isn't just sort of ad hoc programs that give back to the community, for example, which some people see kind of cynically, and I think sometimes it's fair to be cynical. But I think there's a way to work out these models so that they work for everyone involved. How can you grow a business, generate demand, satisfy customers in a way that's also societally valuable? So I think we think about this when we think about things like social entrepreneurship and impact investing, but these ideas, believe it or not, haven't really trickled into marketing that much. And I think that's a pity, and I think we need to change that way of thinking. Because I think what's good for society should be good for the people and should be good for the business at the end of the day as well. And if we can work out a way to make all that fit together as a complex system, then I think we're on the right track in terms of how we do this. So there's a framework. MBA students love frameworks, so there's your framework. But this is really the way I think about marketing with purpose, is bringing these approaches together to deliver value with purpose to these different stakeholder constituencies, where technology and data are that sort of fulcrum or that interface between the approaches to the market challenges and market problems, and then what we want to get out of marketing in terms of value creation. So technology and data has to be there. It's absolutely critical that it's an enabler, but it shouldn't be the whole thing. And I think we've gotten a little bit too far in one direction. We need to pull back and think about technology more smartly as a result. So, with that said, how do we as a business school do this? So it's great that I'm standing up here sort of gesticulating on my vision and what I think we should do, but how do we actually make this happen? And how do we grapple with these challenges, which I think are world-scale challenges, which is part of what this school is about, with respect to the future of marketing, so we can chart a way forward. Because we can talk about it and do research on it, but I think we need to go further than that. And so, in that spirit, I think we need to collaborate with industry. And so, I want to take this opportunity to announce a new initiative. And I'm very proud to announce this initiative and the launch today of the Oxford Future of Marketing Initiative. And there's a nice banner over there. So it must be real. But what we're really doing here as a school is trying to be a global hub for thought leadership around the future of marketing and marketing with purpose that brings together leading academics, leading thought leaders, and people and executives from leading organizations around the world to grapple with these challenges, to discuss, to debate, to work out tangible things that we can do and work on together to address these challenges that marketing is facing, so that we can move forward with purpose. And I'm very, very, very pleased to announce that we've got our founding partners and representatives of our founding partners are all here this evening. And so I just want to mention who they are, because it's an impressive group that covers the full spectrum from brands in different industries to agencies, all the way to software and technology and sort of data analytics companies. And so these are the partners. So Allianz, which is the world's largest insurance and asset management company. Kantar, which is part of WPP. So WPP is the world's largest advertising group. Kantar is the home to the world's leading marketing, research, data, and insight companies. L'Oreal gladly is part of this as well, the world's leading beauty and cosmetics company, home to some really, really well-known brands, not just the sort of flagship well-known L'Oreal brands, but about 32 different brands in that industry. Nucleus Marketing Solutions, which is a really, I think, a visionary new type of advertising technology company, founded by 4 large media companies in the United States, with the purpose of offering advertisers a better way to digitally advertise, to reach better audiences, but to do it in a way that supports high-quality journalism. So, if you need an example of a company with a business model that's delivering societal purpose at the same time as being good business and business value, I think is a good example. Particularly in sort of today's day and age where I think we need high-quality journalism more than ever. And then lastly is Teradata. So Teradata is one of the world's largest data analytics software and consulting companies. And they work with really many of the world's biggest brands and biggest companies to help them with data analytics. So they can really get a lot of value out of their data in a meaningful way. So these 5 visionary organizations have partnered with us, and they're all represented here. And we spent the day together. The MBA students who are here got a glimpse of this at lunchtime, but we've sort of been behind closed doors discussing lots of things throughout today in terms of what we need to focus on for the future of marketing and what our initiative will be. So kind of watch this space. But I think it's really, really important to bring to bear both academic and practitioner and industry perspectives to this challenging problem. So to sort of think about the conclusion here. If we return to my original question, has marketing lost its way? I think the answer is yeah, it has. But it's not all doom and gloom. I sometimes get accused of being a little bit too pessimistic about this. But I actually think it's an optimistic point in the marketing world because there's lots of things we can do. We certainly have technology that's giving us massive, massive digital capabilities. So what we could dream of, we can kind of do. But I think it's a good time to pause, take stock, and look back and say, well, actually, have we lost our way? Have we lost our purpose in what we're doing? So my challenge to the marketing world is to ensure that our work is purposeful, and in particular, that we see technology as an enabler, as a valuable tool, as a means to an end, but not the end in of itself. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.